Okay.
It's online.
Version.
It's got lots of writing in the columns. Just the next slide is an extremely brief summary of the finding the balance exercise and what was undertaken. As you all know, it happened over 5 weeks between the 24th of February and the 30th of March and is still open for comments. If people wish to comment, we would always listen to them, but for purposes of moving this process forward, we have had to summarise and bring it to you at this stage. Of course, the natural hazards chapter is still out there and we're not bringing it to you until the timeframes I talked about earlier. We have posted out to date 16,500 letters. We'll be posting out another 20 to 30,000 around public hazards, probably the end of this week. 30 plus public meetings, and that doesn't include all the additional meetings we've had just with NZPI or various other agencies. There's been information sheets, there have been 2 radio interviews, 3 items in the press, 1 in the Sunday Star Times and 1 ICTV interview. There have been 3 online surveys. There's been an online site to pick up all comments from emails and Facebook and Twitter updates. And then, of course, there was the Forum for Natural Hazards that was held on the 15th of March. Now, that's probably a bit too light for you to read, but if I can just point out, the largest part of the circle, the comments relate to residential chapter. The second largest, sort of on the right-hand side, is transport, and there's sort of 2 equal in the northwestern corner, and that's for commercial and industrial, and the rest have hardly featured. Clear? As said before, the collaborative process has included a collaborative advisory group, and that's made up of the UDS partners, so that's Selwyn, YMAC, ECAN, NZTA, ourselves and iwi, and now includes Sarah and MFE in advisory capacity also. This approach was formalised through terms of reference between the ministers and ourselves. And as a sort of a subgroup of Sarah, we've included the joint officials group, who are not the people who were there regularly meeting on a weekly basis as CAG was, but have come into the process a little more latterly.
Is there any governance representation on those groups?
Government.
Governance from our point of view?
No.
So it just strikes me as kind of odd having people like Sarah and MFE who are basically giving advice to the minister and are going to be the decision makers sitting in that group.
Well, they're not the decision makers.
Well, the government, effectively.
They have provided feedback to us, and we're going to get a copy of that, aren't we?
Yes, that's right. Yes.
I mean, given that they are going to be advising government, I'd actually rather that they told us what they were going to be advising ahead of time, so that we can have a look at that and see whether we can address any of it.
And that is why we spent the 10 hours in workshops, because, as you say, we wanted to hear from them earlier rather than just at the time when it goes to the ministers.
So are we, as a council, an active participant in discussing ideas like things like reducing consenting? Or where do you get your mandate?
Well, this is your role now.
This is our role now. So, I mean, this has been speeded up. It's a speeded up process, and probably a little bit more time and effort would have gone onto the front end. But actually having some knowledge about what the joint central government agencies are going to be advising their ministers is a very good idea. I've read through the document, but I've only just received it. And we will be receiving a copy of it. Everyone will receive a copy of it today. And I think, Brigitte, you're going to add some commentary of your own, which will be useful as well. I've read it without that context, but it is important because there are strategic decisions around whether we want to do that. But we're going to have to know what the answers are in relation to that before it goes off to the minister and they come back with their advice.
Yeah, I guess my concern is really around the fact that the community don't seem to have a voice in that kind of working group, if you like. So we're hearing from one point of view, which is fine. Appreciate hearing from that point of view, but I do feel that there's a gap in terms of community representation on that panel.
Yep.
And yes, and so the Joint Officials Group, along with Sarah and MFE, have given us the pre-notification comments, which you'll receive, as Leanne said. Just very, very briefly picking out a few of the sort of more regular comments that come back through that route, that there needs to be a vision and some kind of binding narrative. In my mind, they're talking about two different things there. A vision is not a necessary item under the Resource Management Act, and this is more like something that would happen under the Local Government Act and possibly is done through the long-term planning, financial plan type process. And you can consider whether you want that to go into the district plan or not. We'll talk more about these. I'm just giving you a very high-level preview at the moment. And then they're talking about binding narrative, which means, having a whole lot more explanation and description about certain things throughout the plan. And there was a decision made very early on in the process when it first came to the previous council to start this process, was to have a streamlined plan that focused just on objectives, policies and rules. Neither of those two matters, a vision or a binding narrative, are required in the Resource Management Act. The second comment there is to reduce consents. We have reduced a number of consents, but of course with our natural hazards approach there are more consents coming into the plan. But we'll talk more about that as well. And we are also undertaking some further investigative approach on the levels of resource consents that we're proposing to in these draft chapters as well. One of the themes that comes through regularly is too many development and control standards, particularly for urban design. There's an over-reliance on these prescriptive rules. And again, that's about achieving the balance between having a design-led process to your city and perhaps having the development community seeing that puts too many obstacles in the way. So there's a balance to be got there. And the reason we've put them into development and control standards, these urban design elements, is because previously they were assessment criteria, which doesn't give any certainty at all to somebody looking at the plan. It just says that we will look for certain things, but you won't know whether what you've given us actually meets those standards or not. So it's about trying to make them more certain. And consider ways to improve clarity and consistency and usability of the plan. Well, definitely there can always be improvement, and we are continuing to do that as we work through. But of course, once it's signed off, we would have to stop all of that. We're looking at consistency and continuing to check cross-referencing and weeding out duplication, that kind of thing. And then MKT are a subgroup of CAG. They also attend CAG, and because MKT itself has been going through a restructure, they brought in the Runanga Forum to discuss all of these chapters with, and they're in a sense a subgroup of the CAG group as well. And excellent feedback from them. Most of their comments have been hugely constructive and strategic, and we've taken most of them on board. So just again to recap, once we finish this process here for this first group of chapters, of which there are 8, plus the introduction and the maps, etc., then they go to the ministers for 15 working days. Then they come back.
And what's the date for that? Just to remind us.
Well, in that
so we
first
expect
slide,
to give the, yes, I know it's on the first slide, but
on the first page of the handout.
Yep.
Some of these dates are still yet to be confirmed, but we've said that we'd forwarded them. We've got a rough date in there, Friday the 16th of May.
So, okay, so Friday the 16th of May,
Yep.
and they get 15 working days after that, 3 weeks.
That's correct. Yep. And then they come back. You have to have regard to them, make any changes should you consider that's necessary, and then notify for submissions mid-year sometime for 30 days, and then another 10 days for further submissions, and then they go to the hearings, and there'll be decisions released, and there may be opportunity for appeals to court.
Yeah.
When it says council to have regard to comments, does that mean council will have regard of those comments or may have regard?
It means that
No, we
council
have
can,
to give-
at this stage, and I understand discussions have agreed that the council should be the deciding element of what goes into the chapters when they're notified. So yes, they must have regard to them. It doesn't mean to say you have to take them on board and change the plan. At the moment, what it's saying is if there is an intention not to change the plan in any way with respect to some of the comments, all of the comments, then we have to have a written response back to the ministers.
But these dates could slip if the Order in Council's not ready.
And potentially some of these factors could change as well.
Yeah. Yanni?
So we have a input to the notification submissions, but what I don't understand is what input do we have for where it goes for further submissions and to the final decision?
We'd have none. So we notify for further submissions and then it gets handed over to the hearings panel. That's the end of our involvement.
Except, Madam Chair, that we can put a submission in if we think it's necessary at the time of submissions.
So who makes the final decision?
The hearings panel.
Is it the minister or the hearings panel?
The hearings panel.
The hearings panel currently is to be decided by the ministers in consultation with the council.
No, so once the hearing panel makes its decision,
They make the decision.
That would normally, like under normal process, that would come back to council.
Yes.
No.
And we'd
That's not the intention.
No,
endorse
that
it.
is not the intention.
So the intention is the hearings panel, whatever decision they make, that's final. And
Yeah,
the minister,
but subject to appeal
doesn't-
on points of law.
doesn't have any further control.
No.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And just to note, of course, that we do this all again next year around the same time.
Yeah.
And just take me
Hang
through
on.
the hearings panel again. Who's appointing the hearings
The
panel?
decision panel is appointed by the ministers, Sarah and MFE, in consultation with the council.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
But as I say, the Order in Council is not gazetted and, presumably not finalised in terms of detail. So, some things may change, but we're going through the process as if what we understand the position to be is the position. Glenn?
Thank you, and I guess that was my question. We noticed changes to the LERP, so are we quite comparing apples with apples here, or it's entirely different?
This is a different process from the
Yeah.
LERP. This is not a recovery plan, it's a district plan.
Yeah, but I'm thinking more of the changes that were made after we'd agreed.
I'm not sure what your question is, I'm sorry.
Okay. I think I'll leave it. I mean, we noticed changes after we agreed to the LERP, and it's quite apparent that can happen here.
No, it can't happen here. We are the ones who will notify the actual plan change. We will notify that as a council. It will then go to the hearings panel. Government can make submissions to the hearings panel in the same way that we can. But at that point, it is our plan at the end of the day, but it will be determined by the hearings panel, not by the minister. So it doesn't go back to the minister like a recovery plan does,
That's right.
where it could be altered after the fact. Jimmy?
Regarding to the document of notification for submission, if the minister, reviewed all those original documents, maybe some of them is minor, some a little bit bigger, different view from the council. So those the document notification for submission is compliant with the minister the view, or is compliant with the council the view.
What do you mean?
Yeah.
I mean is we have a document of the notification for the submission, am I right? I mean is all those the document is when the minister sign off.
The minister doesn't sign off on this. He did that with the land use recovery plan, but the minister doesn't sign off on this. We, the council, we sign off on the formal notification of our district plan.
Yes.
So, and it goes out for formal submissions, but people do not submit to us. They submit to a hearings panel, the makeup of which will be determined by the ministers Minister for Canterbury Earthquake Recovery and the Minister for the Environment in consultation with the Christchurch City Council. So that will come back to us. We will have a say, but at the end of the day, the ministers will determine through a cabinet process.
Sorry, Mayor. So you mentioned a document of notification or submission is from the hearing panel distributed rather than from us.
Yes.
When we submitted to the minister on 16th of May, then after that time period, all belong to the government responsibility.
No.
Or
I think there's a
to
misunderstanding here.
Yeah.
So let me make it clear. The chapters will go to the ministers, two ministers, the Minister for the Environment and the Minister for Canterbury Earthquake Recovery. Those two ministers will report back to us and they will suggest changes that they would like to see made to the formal plan for the notification process. We have to go through all of those, but we don't have to accept them. Under the current understanding of what the Order in Council will provide, that is our decision as to what the notification will contain. It will then go to a hearings panel for the hearing of submissions and for the final decision. And the reason that we agreed as a council that we would have the final decision made by the hearings panel is that technically we couldn't do other than that because we would be subject to judicial review by whatever party was disgruntled with our decision by going against what the hearing panel promoted. And so it was better to simply accept that the hearing panel would make the decision. It is not the government's decision. It is our plan, and we are essentially getting an independent body to make that decision. There is still a right of appeal on points of law. So if they get the law wrong, then they will be appealed.
And we will be giving evidence on the basis of the council's position too at those hearings, but just like anybody else will from other parties.
And you'll be supporting the process as well, as I understand it. So there's two separate...
Yes, although they do need to be separated.
Yes, they're separate within the council, but you will be presenting our view, not an official's view. All right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's why the chapters are draft at the moment.
Yep.
And they're coming to you for your consideration and endorsement later on. Okay, so that's all I have as an introduction to what we're going to do. I was just going to now move on to this draft introduction chapter, which you should have seen. This is the one and only chapter that has absolutely no legal binding effect on the district plan. It is probably the only chapter that is descriptive and explanatory, and it simply tells you how to use the document, how the document's been framed, the statutory framework that it sits within, the statutory context, like the different acts that it works within, the various plans and strategies and policies that have informed it and that have given it direction, and then a guide to how each chapter is set out. So it doesn't have any objectives, policies or rules in it, which is why it hadn't come to you before. It's only recently been drafted. One thing that we could add into here, which I think might be useful, is a little more description on the zones in each of the chapters and how they fit together. And in a sense, that's the kind of thing that CJOG or the Canterbury Joint Officials Group are asking is a little bit more binding narrative. So that's what we could do for the introduction to assist that. So are there any questions on this chapter? I don't expect to spend a lot of time on it.
Yanni?
Yeah, thank you. You'll note in the media there was concern expressed that we were trying to, basically, it was saying we were doing too little too late in terms of restricting development in the suburbs. I just felt in the introduction it was really important to highlight that we had actually requested government to intervene earlier and that had been rejected. So, I think it's unfair that we bear the criticism of things that were beyond our control when we actually asked for some help from government, which was declined, around the issuing of consents for development after the earthquake in those suburban areas.
Do you know why it was declined?
No, I don't, no.
You haven't read the paper that we were all given a copy of? Because what it said is that the government didn't give itself the power to halt the consenting process, just the resource consenting process. And so actually it was a bit of a not seeing the big picture right from the very outset. So they didn't have the power to stop the consenting process. And I actually wonder whether the council itself should have taken some steps to actually introduce its own moratorium and then see if anyone had challenged it. Because, I mean, it's ridiculous that things happened in the CBD, for example, which are now subsequently having to be taken down because they don't, meet the context of the plan itself. But that was my understanding. I always wondered why the government didn't at least put a pause on if they found the word moratorium somewhat difficult to use.
Sorry, I missed that paper. What paper was that?
It was one of the cabinet papers around the, and it does definitely admit that the council did ask for the moratorium to apply, but they didn't have the power to apply it beyond resource consents.
They could have, like they did with many things, they could have had an order in council that
No,
addressed
they didn't have the power in the order in council provision of the Act. The Act did not give them the power to stop us issuing consents. And that was, it was probably unfortunate that the council didn't put a strong submission to the select committee that got one day to come and hear submissions down here, instead of having, really a disjointed submission from Christchurch City. All of the other people turned up with their, with their top gun, as it were, in order to present a powerful submission. But at Christchurch City, I think, really was let down in that whole process. But, I mean, it is what it was. I think that we can deal with that in another way. I don't think writing our district plan by reflecting on why a certain action didn't happen 2 years ago is unhelpful. And I think if we want to improve our communications around the fact that, people are seeing this process as too little too late, we can reflect on why that may be seen to be the case, but this is what we are doing now.
I just thought it was important to have context, because it just seemed to me that people were grizzling at us for something that was really beyond our control.
I think
so
that
having context around it, just.
Yeah, but this is our district plan that will be speaking in the present and future tense. It's not. I mean, I think that if we want to have an introduction that actually, perhaps presents a little bit of context around why we're doing this particular review and the format that we're doing it, then maybe it would be helpful to include something there. Phil?
I just wondered, with this introductory chapter, about the link with our whole earthquake recovery and rebuild, and just how the district plan actually, what it tells. I know we've heard quite a bit about the bits of it, but I'm just wondering if perhaps you could just comment on that, Brigitte. It just seemed to me to be a good place to.
Well, it's the strategic directions that go then.
Point 4 in the introduction, the statutory context, really, I think, explains what you're asking. And also point 6 with respect to other strategies and policies.
Okay.
If we start, I guess the decision is if you decide to open up the introduction to a whole lot of narrative on history and various other things, then you start to have a narrative on how settlements occurred, what kind of resources we have in the city, and you could end up with quite a large chapter, but that is your decision. So
I just wonder if it is actually the strategic directions part that actually deals with a lot of these issues.
Yes, there is that too, and we're just about to get to that.
Did the CCAG, did they make the point that that we don't really need an introductory chapter, and that it would just be adding to the...
No, they didn't make that point. No, they said they wanted a vision for the city.
But in addition, they said they didn't think this was a necessary chapter.
No, I don't think so.